I'm not entirely sure on the exact date of when this happened, but it would have been around 1999, maybe in spring or summer. Living in Australia, you're bound to see strange things from time to time, although most have an explanation behind them. This is different. I was young at the time, probably 9 or so, and my family was having a barbecue in the backyard of our house. We were all sitting at this table on the patio, eating and talking, not really paying attention to anything surrounding us. Suddenly, I heard a plop noise come from the leaf cover in the garden among the back fence. I immediately turned and looked to see what had made the noise. To my horror, I saw a small blue creature look at me, then run into the shrubbery. It was about 15 centimeters tall, and it was on all fours. It didn't have any toes that I could see. Its face was vertically oval-shaped with small black eyes, a long protruding nose, and a grimacing mouth filled with almost needle-like teeth. The outer of the face was dark blue, sort of like a mane, but it looked hairless. The rest of the face and body was light blue. The best I can describe the body is like that of a lion, except with short legs, no tail, and less sculpted. I looked at my brother and he said, "What was that?" He had seen it too. When my mom calmed us down, she took my brother and me to separate rooms of the house and got us to draw what we had seen. We both drew the same thing. I was terrified for the rest of the night. To this day, I still don't know what the creature was that I saw, but it still gives me the creeps. I used to work at a cheese factory on the edge of a cornfield in southwestern Minnesota. There were a series of days in the summer of 2004 or 2005 where it was so hot that the milk being delivered to us in trucks would evaporate before we got it. It made work easy. Not having any milk denied us any actual labor, but management wouldn't let us not come to work, so we would show up and mess around a bit all shift. I was working nights at the time. It was either 2 or 3 a.m., and I was out on the loading dock watching bats fly around the floodlights, because I like being out in the cool night air. The corn was about as high as my shoulder, so roughly about 5'10". As I was watching the bats, I looked down at the edge of the cornfield. Something was moving there. It was the size of a small child and very, very skinny. Pale with something that looked like a head of straight black hair. It moved in a sort of jerky gait, like someone dancing the robot, but dancing it really badly. It moved in chunks, legs, then hips, then torso, shoulders, neck, and finally head. It was looking back into the cornfield, or at least I felt like it was. I felt prickly all over. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was a heron or something at first, but it looked too much like a person. It didn't move like a person, though. Gradually, step by step, it moved towards me. Letting my curiosity better my fear, I moved toward the edge of the dock, which was raised a few feet off the ground. When I got within a few feet of the edge, the thing looked at me. I was paralyzed. I could have run, but I was stuck somewhere between terrified and intrigued. It moved, its face still pointed at me. It ratcheted its body in that jerky movement towards the cornfield, and I then went into it. I tried to watch where the field moved as it passed, but the corn remained perfectly still. I noticed that all the crickets were silent. After a few minutes, nothing happened. I stood out there for an hour, but it never came back. I never saw it again. This story takes place, I think, in the summer of 1995, making me about 9 years old. Practically every other year, my family would take a trip to Florida. We would usually go to Disney World, but my mom was getting sick of that. So that year, we actually didn't go to Disney World, to my sister's and my dismay. On one of these days, we were on a beach. I don't remember what the beach was called, but the people sitting next to us mentioned that it was being at the bottom tip of Florida. After a while, nothing happened. Everyone was either in the ocean or sunbathing silently. A woman sitting to the left of us pointed past us to our right, asking, "What is that?" We all turned and looked to a surprisingly vacant corner of the beach. There were no people down there, but what there was something really strange. We all got up to get a better look, very quickly forming a crowd around it. If I had to describe the creature we saw in one word, that word would be cartoonish. I will never forget what it looked like. It was green, and it looked like a ball of slime about the size of a basketball. It had tentacles resting on the ground around it, with two longer tail-like tentacles sticking out of its back. The thing that was the most bizarre and made it look cartoonish were its eyes, which were on stalks that stood about a foot off its body. The eyes looked creepily human and just looked at us in an almost disinterested way. The other strange thing about it was its mouth, which never seemed to close, and where you'd expect to see teeth were tooth-shaped fleshy protrusions. No one, not even the creature, seemed scared, and after a while it lazily slithered back into the ocean. There were roughly 10 witnesses to this thing, and we all spent most of our time talking about what it might have been. One idea was that it was a parasite organism from a much larger creature, one also possibly never identified. My strange story took place on the 26th of September 2009. My church was on a retreat in Indiana in a forest. The place we stayed at was a small building in the center of the forest. We decided that evening to go out and play in the forest with the children. So we came up with a game to play. It was like police. The kids were the police and we would pick an adult to be the hostage. So when we began the game, we had to find the adult hiding in the forest in the middle of the night. So we start going around the back of the building and we spotted a tall figure. It had to be at least 6 feet tall. It was running towards the trees, where there was a small open area with the tall grass that goes up to your knees. It ran with its arms at its sides, but it stopped at the edge of the tall grass, as if to wait for us to get closer. We chased after it, thinking it was the adult. When we were finally a few yards away, it dove into the grass and started to crawl very fast, almost snake-like. We got weirded out, but stood there staring at it. When it got across the tall grass, it began to climb a tree. It looked somewhat like a deformed cat-like animal when it was climbing. Then a few moments later, a kid yelled, "I see him!" and was pointing in an opposite direction. We saw a similar figure running a couple yards away, so we chased it, but then it vanished behind a tree. Turns out a few minutes later, we found the adult hiding in the parking lot at the front of the building the whole time. So who knows what we saw that night in the forest? At least 15 kids saw the same thing with me, so I know I'm not crazy. Back in September of 2004, I was hiking just outside of Kyoto, Japan. I had decided to leave the touristy area and set off alone in a random direction towards the mountains. I found myself on an old trail through the forest. After a while, I encountered an old man with a long white beard. He carried a staff and was dressed in coarse blue robes, like a peasant out of a samurai movie. He saw me and told me to follow him. Being more curious than anything, I walked after him as he led me further into the forest. He spoke at length about the beauty of nature and how people cut down forests and polluted the earth, and told me that humans must learn to protect and respect nature. During the whole exchange, he never spoke about himself or asked any questions of me. After a while, he said that he had to leave and showed me another trail, saying I should take it when I wanted to go back to the city. He then left by that trail. I happened to pass the same place on the way back that evening, so I took the trail the old man showed me. Only minutes later, I ended up completely lost and couldn't even find the trail itself to retrace my steps. It was getting dark out, and as I shone my flashlight around, I noticed an old white fox watching me from nearby. I could have sworn it was watching me with an amused look on its face. But as soon as I shone my light on it, it ran off into the bushes. I remember reading all sorts of old Japanese stories and legends about fox spirits that can take human form, and I feel like I may have seen one that day. The following happened in Veeder, Texas on June 20th, 2000, just around 1 a.m. I just got off from work and I was headed east. On this road, there's a 90-degree turn, and at times you have to watch because cattle might be out and on the road. That morning, that's what I thought had happened. No one else was on the road, but I saw red eyes that would look at the truck lights and look down over and over, and I knew something was not right. I was driving on the left side of the road, and when I got close, I noticed that this red-eyed creature stood about 5 foot tall and sported black hair all over its body. I stopped the truck and got out my spotlight and shined it on this creature. It seemed like forever, but I know that it was only a few minutes. This creature raised its arm above its head and let out a terrible scream that I've heard before. It turned around and went behind a house and left. I have heard this sound before when I lived on Teal Road in Orange, Texas, just a few miles from this location. I've traveled this road many times hoping to see this creature again, and never have. I'm told this creature is related to Bigfoot. I was driving on Broadkill Road in Broadkill Beach, Delaware around dusk in July of 2007. This road borders a swamp area. Standing on the side of a road by the swamp, my daughter and I saw a creature like we've never seen before. It stood about 2.5 to 3 feet tall with long legs, a tan body, a flat, almost puggish face, and a really long tail. It had small ears and looked to be about 30 pounds. My other daughter and her friend also saw this same animal the year before around the same area, except it was night and it ran in front of their car. I asked the lady who owned the Broadkill Beach store about it, and she said she had seen it once when she was dirt biking with her dad in that area years before. And both her and her dad had no idea what it was, even though she was raised around there. She said we were lucky to have spotted it, as very few people had seen it. We went to the Prime Hook Reserve, this is what the swampy area is called, museum, and they had no idea what it could be. I'm wondering if anyone else has seen it and what the heck it is. You will never believe what I saw one very cold, dry November night. My family and I moved into a new house upon a hill on a little back road in the very small town of Fort Gay, West Virginia. Fort Gay sits right on the east side of Kentucky. The population of my town then was probably just a couple thousand. My family and I were unpacking. We had not yet put the furniture in its rightful places, and everything was still in boxes. Overwhelmed with working all day, I retired around 11 p.m. I put my little brother on the couch, and I took his bed since my bed wasn't put together yet. His room faces the front of the house. His window is about 20 to 25 feet or so off the ground. I was looking out the window when I saw it. It stood nearly 7 feet tall. I had no idea what it was, but I was frozen. I had never been that scared in all my life. All I could do was lay there and just stare at this thing. It was sitting in a tree about 50 feet or so off the ground, about 50 feet from the house across the yard. It felt like an eternity. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even blink. It had big, red, bright glowing eyes looking dead into my face. I finally worked up enough courage to close my eyes and put my head under the covers, when all of a sudden, this thing smacked the window. I went through the house screaming, "There's something outside!" I was crying. My mom and dad looked at me and said, "What's wrong with you? It looks like you have seen a ghost." My face was snow white and I said, "I don't know what it was, but please, Daddy, don't go outside." I begged and begged. He came back in and said there was nothing out there. I kept screaming, saying, "Yes, yes there is." When I explained to them what I saw and how I felt, they said I was crazy, but to this day I will not go outside by myself. And even in the days, someone still has to walk me to my car. I have heard of something pretty crazy things going on up on that road, but I never expected to experience anything myself. My husband and I went to the theaters and watched Mothman Prophecies. I was reliving that night all over again. The way they described feeling and what they saw was remarkable. My husband looked over at me and said, "Isn't that what you described to me when we first started dating?" I couldn't say a word. After that moment, I knew what I had saw. I believe in all my hearts of hearts I saw the Mothman. It's just a little weird. I only live about 80 miles south of Point Pleasant, where all that took place 37 years ago. It was exactly 32 years to the month when I saw it. KH was camping at a national forest campground in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. One night, after his wife and daughter had fallen asleep, he was sitting by the fire when he heard a noise. This was different than the usual bear grunt. It was more like someone sneaking in the trees. I immediately grabbed the flashlight. What I saw haunts me even now. I saw a being in the trees, hunched down. It was naked and it looked gray. It was very muscular, but its legs were backwards, like a bird's. Then it quickly turned and bounded off down the hill. I couldn't even follow it with my light. We left the next day. The next year we went back to the same campground and campsite. Again, I stayed up late, poking the fire and reading. It was maybe 1 or 2 in the morning when I heard noises. I shined the light in that direction. The same creature was there. It looked exactly the same as I'd remember it from the previous year. It just sat there, crouched at the small tree line that separates the campsites. I slowly walked toward it. I tried to not make any threatening moves or gestures. I got to within 20 feet when it jumped backwards and disappeared. It looked like it might be 5 to 6 feet high if it stood up. It was definitely gray. It had human features, but more leathery. Its face was very wide. Its eyes were so big, and even though they reflected light, They still looked black, like two intensely black marbles. Its legs were very muscular but turned backwards. I know what I saw. It was real. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you'd like to, you can follow me at Twitter. The handle is @FuzzyPantaloons. And I'll see you all next time.